The red carpet was laid out at the feet of Jingyu and Xiaochun. In the restaurant, the beautiful maids all stood on both sides of the red carpet. With a smile on their faces, they bowed and said, "Welcome, master and master." Jingyu, Xiaochun, 3rd Xing and 15th Xing were all stunned. Looking at this scene, they frowned in confusion. Chapter 2107. So, what kind of situation was this? Jingyu blinked and then saw the manager of the restaurant. He was a huge fat man. With his short legs, he quickly rolled towards Jingyu, Xiaochun, and the others. Yes, he rolled over. Jingyu almost laughed out loud when she saw this scene. Look at the running fat man. His legs couldn't even be seen, and he looked like he was rolling over. He had only taken a few steps and he was already panting. Jingyu, Xiaochun, and the others calmly crossed their arms and watched as the manager of the restaurant finally reached them. "Greetings. Greetings. Boss. Boss. Old master." The fat man didn't even have time to catch his breath. Jingyu looked at the way the fat man panted and was afraid. Would he collapse before he could catch his breath? "You are the manager of this place?" Jingyu frowned deeply and asked the man in front of her. "Yes, I am Zhao Yibin, the manager of Pong City Restaurant." The fat man bowed respectfully to Jingyu and Xiaochun. "Per? Average? Zhao Yibin?" Jingyu was dumbfounded when she heard this name. Yes. When Zhao Yibin straightened his body, Jingyu's mouth twitched violently. She looked at Zhao Yibin and said, "You should be called Zhao Ichio. Qiuqiu, lead the way." Xing Shiwu followed behind Jingyu. When he heard the conversation between Jingyu and Zhao Yibin, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Zhao Yibin was stunned when he heard Jingyu's words. Then, under everyone's gaze, he exclaimed in surprise, "Zhao Ichio? Aya. The name boss came up with is simply too awesome. I like it. From now on, my name is Zhao Ichio." Zhao Yibin said happily, "I." Jingyu looked at Zhao Yibin and was speechless. She silently added, "Damn it." Then, under the gazes of countless people, she stepped on the red carpet and walked into the restaurant. Jingyu inexplicably felt a very good feeling. It was really fun, but if there was no accident, their whereabouts would be exposed again. Jingyu sighed helplessly. Was this the tragedy of being a celebrity? Jingyu, Xiaochun, and the rest entered the restaurant in a grandiose manner. The restaurant had already been tidied up. When Jingyu saw this series of arrangements, she immediately turned to Zhao Yibin with a conflicted expression and asked, "How did you get the news that I would be here today?" "Hehehe. It was Uncle Shun who sent the news." Zhao Yibin smiled and looked at Jingyu as he said softly, "As expected." Jingyu heard this and helplessly lowered her eyes. Ever since Shan Yuqing found out that Jingyu was not dead, the way he treated Jingyu was completely different. He couldn't wait to move all the good things in front of Jingyu. Look at the situation now. Jingyu was about to leave for the Roman forest. She really had to hand it to him for the grand preparations along the way. The room was clean and tidy. Jingyu propped up her chin and looked around the room. She nodded in satisfaction. When she was sure that there was nothing else she needed, she chased Zhao Yibin away. Jingyu sat comfortably on a soft chair at the side and frowned slightly. Why aren't the two children here yet? Jingyu looked up at Xiaochun and asked worriedly. Chapter 2108. They should be there soon. Xiaochun pursed his lips and replied, "It's all your fault. I told you to let the children come with us. Why didn't you listen?" Jingyu glared at Xiaochun in disgust. Her eyes were filled with anger as she said, "If anything happens to my son, I won't let you off," Jingyu said threateningly. Xiaochun frowned and said, "With Yin Jian and Yin Feng accompanying them, as well as Zhang Hua, I think, ordinary people won't be able to get close to them." Humph. When Jingyu heard Xiaochun's words, she coldly snorted and slowly nodded. Thinking about it this way, it did seem to be the case. The two little guys that Jingyu and Xiaochun were talking about were naturally Xiaozin and Xiaozian. When they left the prince's mansion, Jingyu was taken away by Xiaochun. These two 4 or 5 years old children were dumped by Xiaochun. He was seriously doubting whether they were really his biological children. Xiaochun was already very unhappy looking at these two children. For the past 3 years, there were suddenly two stinky brats occupying Jingyu. Xiao Chen felt that his position was in danger. This time, he would not let these two children stay in the Roman forest. They have already grown up. Nothing will happen, Xiao Chun said with a stiff neck. As he spoke, he moved closer to Jingyu and hugged Jingyu with his hands. Jingyu was very angry at Xiao Chen's behavior. He was only 4 or 5 years old. How could he have grown up? On this side, Jingyu and Xiao Chen waited in the city. On the other side of the mountain forest, a carriage was slowly moving. From time to time, the sound of laughter could be heard from the carriage. On both sides of the carriage, 2 large gray wolves were walking slowly. Behind the gray wolves were 3 or 4 small wolves. Sixth uncle, when can we see father and mother? At this moment, the curtain of the carriage was lifted, and a small head stretched out. On the small neck, there was a short snake tail that was curling up. The black snake tail retracted, and a raised snake head was revealed. The man who was driving the car stiffened when he saw the snake's red forked tongue. Eldest young master, there's still half a day before we can meet up with Madam. The person who responded was the guard in charge of protecting the 2 young masters. Sixth Xing thought that this was a good job. He spent a lot of effort to snatch this job from others. But he didn't expect that along the way, he would really experience what it meant to be worse than death. Look at the way they were escorting them. So many wolves, and the world-famous red burial flower. How could it be his turn to protect them? At most, he would be an errand boy and a coachman. There's still so much time. Sixth uncle, you're driving too slowly. The person who spoke was Xiao Xin, nicknamed Little Potato. Sixth Xing wanted to cry but had no tears. How was it that he was driving too slowly? Didn't you see the 2 gray wolves eyeing them covetously? It's already good that the horse that was pulling the carriage didn't kneel down. Besides, along the way, the 2 little brats had been playing this and that. Sixth Xing had been worried sick, and now he was even being despised. My brother and I are tired. We need to rest, Xiao Xin said in a serious tone. Sixth Xing frowned and said, it's getting late. If we don't speed up, we won't reach Peng City tonight. Chapter 2109. Can't make it? Xiao Xin suddenly widened his eyes in surprise. Then, the curtain of the carriage swayed and another head popped out. That expressionless face was like a miniature version of Xiao Chan. You mean, we have to spend the night outside? The person who spoke was Xiao Zian, nicknamed Little Watermelon. That's exactly what this subordinate means. Every time he looked at Xiao Zian's face and looked at Xiao Zian's pair of green eyes, he couldn't help but be respectful. When he looked at this face, he thought of Xiao Chen. When he looked at these eyes, he thought of Jingyu. How could he not be respectful? Really? When Xiao Xin heard that he could spend the night outside, his eyes suddenly lit up with surprise. Those dark and bright eyes were so moving. Sixth Xing, who was watching from the side, suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. There was an ominous premonition in his heart. He frowned deeply and looked at Xiao Xin and Xiao Zian, then said, 2 young masters, don't you want to see master and madam as soon as possible? Then let's go quickly. Sixth Xing said, no, I'm tired. I want to rest. Xiao Xin really wanted to see his mother, but when he thought of Xiao Chun, he suddenly became very unhappy. Anyway, he said that he was tired and wanted to rest. No matter what Sixth Xing said, he didn't give in. Sixth Xing wanted to cry but had no tears. Looking at the 2 gray wolves blocking his path, he had no choice but to stop. If he didn't stop, what would he do if the 2 gray wolves rushed up and bit the poor horse to death? It wasn't easy to find a brave horse. If it died, Sixth Xing would sit on the ground and cry. Without a horse to pull the carriage, do you want these 2 gray wolves to pull the carriage? When Sixth Xing thought this, he suddenly trembled silently. He still wanted to live well and not do such a terrible thing. The 2 little guys successfully stopped the carriage. When Sixth Xing reached out to carry the 2 children down, Xiao Xin waved his hand and said, I'm the older brother. I don't want you to carry me. After Xiao Xin finished speaking, he climbed down the carriage with his short legs. Sixth Xing's hand stiffened and the corner of his mouth fiercely twitched. He wanted to reach out to hug Xiao Zian, but when he looked up, he saw Xiao Zian's cold face. Suddenly, he became even more embarrassed. Why did he have a feeling that if he dared to hug her, Xiao Zian would chop him? Woo-woo. This baby is so wronged. What kind of lousy job is this? Six Xing watched as the two little guys got off the ground. The four little gray wolves that followed Yin Jian and Yin Feng immediately gathered around Xiao Xin and Xiao Zian. Those wolf pups were simply too adorable. Of course, these four wolf pups were Yin Jian and Yin Feng's children. Yin Feng was a female wolf. Don't you know? When Jingyu found out that Yin Jian and Yin Feng actually gave birth to pups behind her, she deeply felt a sense of incomparable bitterness. However, she was also very happy. These wolf pups had now completely become Xiao Zian and Xiao Xian's shadow. Big Gray, Second Gray, Third Gray, Little Gray. Xiao Zian shouted domineeringly. The four wolf pups happily scurried to Xiao Zian and Xiao Zian's side. Yin Jian and Yin Feng whimpered and turned their heads away. Their pups actually had such a disgusting name. Chapter 21:10. Yin Jian was very angry. Even though Yin Jian protested countless times to Jingyu, it was to no avail. So, the four big and little grays were born. Six Xing stood to the side and looked at the two children. They were very curious about the things on the side of the road and insisted on playing in the grass. Six Xing couldn't stop them at all. Such a big carriage couldn't block the road. Sixth Xing was about to drive the carriage to the side, but when he got on the carriage, he saw the carriage coming from not far away. The carriage was made of gold and was very exquisite. The carriage was surrounded by guards. Sixth Xing looked at the carriage and suddenly widened his eyes. So dazzling. It's really made of gold. Who is this person? He's just here to show off his wealth. Sixth Xing was thinking, isn't this person afraid of being robbed by bandits? But looking at the guards around the carriage, it was obvious that they were rich and respectable. Which bandits would be so blind as to send themselves to be killed? Sixth Xing shook his head slightly and was about to move the horse carriage away. However, he did not expect that the two little fellows who were originally playing in the grass would turn their heads when they heard the movement of the horse carriage. When they saw the golden horse carriage, their eyes instantly lit up. Six Xing saw Xiao Xian's eyes and was suddenly alarmed. The corner of his mouth twitched fiercely. When he was about to speak, Xiao Xian turned his head and stared at Six Xing seriously and said, "Sixth uncle, I also want that shining carriage." Six Xing was instantly speechless. Xiao Xian really saw a treasure. He pulled Sixth Xing's trousers with his short legs and said excitedly, "I want the glowing carriage." This, eldest young master. Six Xing was deeply conflicted and said, "When we see Madam, we'll ask Master and Madam to make it for you, okay?" Six Xing looked at Xiao Xian considerately and said, "I don't want it. I want it now." Xiao Xian didn't give up. Six Xing was so worried that his hair was about to fall out. Six Xing silently turned his head. Where was he supposed to get this for this little ancestor? Sixth Xing thought as he silently turned his head to look at the golden carriage that had stopped. In his heart, he was weighing whether or not he would be able to win if he were to snatch this ready-made carriage. Looking at these guards, Yin Feng and Yin Arrow should be able to handle them. While Sixth Xing was carefully thinking of a countermeasure, he didn't expect Xiao Xian to walk towards the golden carriage with a few gray wolves. The guards surrounding the carriage looked at the two children walking towards them, then looked at the four wolf pups beside the children and suddenly frowned. Where did this little kid come from? The leader of the guards shouted, "I've taken a fancy to your carriage. Quickly give it to me." Xiao Xian raised his chin and looked at the guard, who was much taller than him, and shouted, "Oh, you want my carriage?" The guard was so shocked by Xiao Xian's words that he didn't recover for a long time. So, these two kids came to rob him? The guard squatted down in amusement and looked at the jade-like child. His eyes were full of smiles. "Whose child are you? Why don't I see the master beside you?" the guard asked while squatting down. Chapter 21:11. Why should I tell you? Xiao Xian unhappily turned his head away. "Oh, you have a bit of a temper." The guard's eyes were also tinged with a faint smile. Looking at the cute and adorable child, he slightly lowered his gaze and fell on the few little gray wolves beside Xiao Xian. "What are these?" The guard widened his eyes in surprise. They looked like puppies, but these guards were obviously not ordinary people. They could tell at a glance that these two children had wolf pups with them. It was really rare to see two children with wolf pups. Looking at these two children, they were definitely not from an ordinary family. Just as the guard was about to ask, Sixth Xing finally walked over. He helplessly looked at Xiao Zin and Xiao Zian and said, "Two young masters, we should go." "No. Sixth uncle, quickly buy this carriage for me." Xiao Zin refused to budge. He grabbed the corner of Sixth Xing's clothes and refused to leave. Sixth Xing ran away in tears. This is really interesting. This young master came out to play and encountered such an interesting robbery? Just as Sixth Xing was thinking about what to do, the glittering carriage curtain was lifted. A man wearing a flowery robe stepped out. The beautiful peony flower on her head instantly attracted Sixth Xing's attention. The man who stepped down and his attire made Xiao Zin and Xiao Zian freeze in place. They blinked their eyes and looked at the person who appeared. After fiercely twitching his mouth, Sixth Xing deeply frowned. This man, why does he look so familiar? Sixth Xing deeply frowned, as if thinking about something. Finally, he suddenly remembered that he seemed to have heard the boss mention a person with this attire before. "This is?" Sixth Xing politely greeted. The man wearing a flowery robe suddenly asked with a look of astonishment, "You actually don't know who I am? This young master is so handsome and elegant, and you actually don't know who I am?" Sixth Xing fiercely twitched his mouth. "Hey, are you a guy or a girl?" At this moment, Xiao Zin, who was blinking his eyes, suddenly asked. His question made Sixth Xing burst out laughing. The man in the flowery robe also widened his eyes when he heard this. "Stinking brat. What did you say?" The man's face was distorted. "My mother said that only women wear flowery clothes. You not only wear flowery clothes, but you also wear a big red flower. Tell me, are you a woman?" Xiao Zin seriously looked at the man and commented, "He doesn't have breasts. Daddy said that those without breasts are men." Xiao Zian, who was standing at the side, also silently sized up the man and said very seriously. After Xiao Zian and Xiao Zin finished speaking, everyone fell into a short silence. If Xiao Zin's words made the man a little angry, then Xiao Zian's words made everyone feel as if they had been struck by lightning. What the hell is going on? Sixth Xing deeply sighed. For the first time, he began to doubt how his master educated his children. The man who was criticized was about to speak, but when he lowered his head and turned his head, he saw Xiao Zian standing next to Xiao Zin. Chapter 21:12. That pair of dark green eyes were shining with a very dazzling light. She had been blocked by Xiao Zin the whole time, so she didn't notice the little boy standing behind Xiao Zin. If Xiao Zian hadn't spoken, she really wouldn't have looked over. "Aya!" When the man saw Xiao Zian's eyes, he immediately cried out in surprise. Seeing this, Sixth Xing frowned slightly and hurriedly stepped forward to protect the two children behind him. "We should go." Sixth Xing didn't want to waste too much time on the road, so he quickly said, "Wait a minute. That child just now had different pupils?" The man in flowery clothes exclaimed in surprise. Sixth Xing frowned when he heard that. Two huge gray wolves suddenly stepped out from behind Sixth Xing and stared at the group of people with covetous eyes. "So what if it is?" Sixth Xing looked at the man with a somewhat warning gaze. "It really is different pupils? Let me see." After the man heard the answer, he immediately said in surprise. With an excited expression, he was about to step forward. However, just as he took a step forward, the two gray wolves beside him suddenly took a step forward. "A war!" The two gray wolves howled very fiercely, causing the man to immediately retreat in shock. Only then did his gaze fall on the two gray wolves. "I know. You guys are Yin Jian and Yin Feng, right?" The man in flowery clothes saw that Yin Jian and Yin Feng were here and immediately became even happier. He said very excitedly, "Aren't you guys inseparable from Jingyu? Since you guys are here, then Jingyu must be here too, right?" "Jingyu! Jingyu! Xiaochun! Ninth Master Xiao! Amuyu! Northern Pastoral Smu Wangya!" The man started shouting at the top of his lungs without saying anything else. Sixth Xing's mouth twitched fiercely when he saw the sudden change in attitude. He finally knew who this person was. So it was the northern pastoralist Mu Wangya. Sixth Xing naturally knew of Lord Mu's great name. So it's Lord Mu. Master and Madam aren't here. They went to Peng City first, Sixth Xing said quietly. Jingyu isn't here? Mu Yu was stunned when he heard this. He lowered his head in disappointment and said, I haven't seen Jingyu in a few years. I don't know if she's still as beautiful as before. What a pity. How did she become the 9th imperial concubine? Sixth Xing's face instantly darkened. Boss was right. This damned Mu Wangya was still coveting Madam. But these two little guys are Jing Yu and Xiao Qin's children. She had grown so big. Let me see. Mu Yu looked at Xiao Xin and Xiao Zian excitedly. He squatted down and carefully looked at the two people. He really saw the shadow of Jing Yu and Xiao Chun on the two people. Xiao Zian's pair of green eyes made Mu Yu sigh and say, they really are Jing Yu's children. When I first saw this pair of strange eyes, I was scared to death. You know my mother and father? Xiao Xin blinked his eyes curiously. He looked at the person in front of him who was neither a man nor a woman and asked, Of course. I'm your father's best friend. I'm also very familiar with your mother. You can call me Uncle Mu. Mu Yu reached out and touched Xiao Xian's head and said kindly. Chapter 21:13. Aren't you Aunt Mu? Are you a man or a woman? Xiao Xin was confused. He looked at Mu Yu curiously. Man, I'm an uncle, not an aunt. Mu Yu instantly went crazy. If someone else dared to say this, Mu Yu would definitely kill him. But the person who said this was Xiao Qian and Jing Yu's child. This was the child of the 9th emperors and the 9th imperial concubine. He really couldn't provoke him. Well, I'll reluctantly say that you're an uncle. Xiao Xin thought carefully and said, What do you mean by that? I'm an uncle. Mu Yu really wanted to cry. This was the first time that his gender was doubted. Who said that men can't wear flowery clothes? How did Jing Yu teach him? Mu Yu felt a deep resentment, but he silently endured it. Uncle Mu, is this your carriage? After Xiao Xin confirmed Mu Yu's gender, he immediately looked at the carriage. He blinked his eyes innocently and said, Uncle Mu, my birthday is coming soon. You haven't given me a birthday gift yet. Why don't you give me this carriage? Eh? Mu Yu was surprised when he heard this. He curiously asked, Your birthday is coming soon. When will it be? Next year. Xiao Xin answered seriously. Mu Yu's mouth stiffened when he heard this. It's only May now. You're asking for a birthday gift until next year? On the side, Xing Lu lowered his eyes. He couldn't do anything to these two little masters. Mu Yu smiled faintly and said, You want to sit in my carriage? Do you want to look for your parents? Yes. Xiao Xin said with a smile, Uncle Mu, you're the best. Just give us the carriage. The two little guys acted cute together. The wolf pups also pulled Mu Yu's clothes. Mu Yu looked at the two little dolls and suddenly felt that her heart was going to melt. When she heard Xiao Xin's praise, she suddenly felt like she was floating in the air. Since you call me uncle, of course, I can give you this carriage. Mu Yu said with a smile, but I want to go with you to look for your parents, okay? Let your parents have a look. Uncle Mu gave you such a beautiful carriage. In the future, let your parents give you an even more beautiful one. Well, since you gave us a carriage, we'll reluctantly let you sit in it. Xiao Xin waved his hand and rushed towards the golden carriage without saying anything. The several wolf cubs also followed him inside. Wow, it's real gold. After Xiao Xin and Xiao Zian determined that the carriage was made of real gold, they completely refused to leave. They held onto the carriage and didn't want to let go. They rolled around inside the carriage. Since Flower Burial had been chased out, he had nowhere else to go, so he could only sit on the roof of the carriage and play. The wolf cubs followed their parents, Yin Jian and Yin Feng, and joined the large group. The soldiers didn't expect that the people they met on the road would be the children of the 9th emperors and the 9th imperial concubine. The golden carriage was incomparably flashy as it moved forward. Along the way, even the bandits had to retreat, looking at the two gray wolves that were escorting the carriage, then looking at the red burial flower that was entrenched on the roof of the carriage. Chapter 21:14. The guards standing on the side were all frightened. They were afraid that if they were unhappy, they would be eaten by the wolf snake. You two, Who is the elder brother and who is the younger brother? Sitting in the carriage, Muyu asked happily. My name is Xiaozin. I am the elder brother. Xiaozin raised his small head and proudly replied. Looking at his appearance, it seemed like he wanted to act like he was the older brother. Oh, you are little potato? Then you are little watermelon? Muyu suddenly raised his eyebrows and turned to look at Xiaozin. After Xiaozin heard Muyu's words, her face suddenly turned ugly. My name is Xiaozin. The way he said his name in such a serious manner was too similar to Xiao Qin's. Muyu was very happy and laughed. Looking at Xiaozin, he inexplicably felt like he was looking at a miniature version of Xiao Qin. His eyes were full of smiles. Sitting in the carriage, he happily chatted with the two little guys. The carriage smoothly entered Peng City after the sky was completely dark. The city was brightly lit. When Muyu appeared in front of Jingyu and Xiao Chun with the two little guys, Jingyu was completely confused. Jingyu, long time no see. Muyu looked at Jingyu with burning eyes and greeted her. He automatically ignored Xiao Chun, who was standing on the side. Why are you here? Jingyu looked at Muyu and was speechless. She widened her eyes and asked, Why is my son with you? Mother. Xiaozin happily rushed into Jingyu's arms. The way he rubbed against Jingyu made Xiao Chun feel disgusted. He stretched out his hand and pulled Xiaozin away. He looked at Xiaozin seriously and said, How did this king teach you? Father. Xiaozin was pulled away by Xiao Chun. He suddenly lowered his head and silently complained in his heart. Father is so bad. Ha ha ha. Muyu on the side laughed heartily and said, This young master was traveling around. I didn't expect to meet these two little guys on the road to rob me. I know they're your children, so I brought them here. Rob? Rob what? Jingyu's eyes widened as she asked in surprise. That. Muyu turned around and pointed outside the restaurant. A shiny golden carriage stopped at the entrance. It was so dazzling that it almost blinded Jingyu's eyes. Jingyu looked at Muyu and her mouth twitched. Only Muyu would bring such a flashy carriage. Was he not afraid of being robbed? Oh, no. Now, she had been robbed by her son. Let's go inside and sit. Jingyu listened to Xiaozin excitedly say that the carriage was given by Uncle Mu. Then, along the way, Uncle Mu talked about some interesting things. She also learned that Uncle Mu almost became her father and so on. Jingyu was still smiling when she heard the first part, but when she heard the last part, she suddenly felt the temperature of the surrounding air drop sharply. Jingyu's facial muscles also stiffened. She turned her head and looked at Muyu, who was getting more and more frightened. Muyu didn't expect that Xiaozin would say all the things he said. Listening to these words, Muyu felt a strong sense of hopelessness. That, Ninth Emperors, this is definitely a misunderstanding. I absolutely don't have the slightest intention of coveting the Ninth Imperial concubine. Muyu quickly explained. Chapter 21:15. However, the gloomy expression on Xiao Qin's face did not dissipate at all after he heard the explanation. I really didn't. Even if I did in the past, I definitely don't have it now. Muyu said again. The corners of Xing San and Xing Lu's mouths twitched when they heard this. How could he explain it like that? In the past, wasn't the Ninth Imperial concubine not married to you yet? As the saying goes, everyone loves beauty. Jingyu is so beautiful, Muyu said it so seriously that he did not notice that Xiao Chun was clenching his fists bit by bit. It felt like his wife was being peeped at. It was incomparably unpleasant. Xiao Chun looked up at Muyu and waved his hand indifferently. Take him away? Yes. Xing San and Xing Shiwu could not stand it anymore. After they received Xiao Chen's order, they immediately stepped forward and took Muyu away without saying anything. Hey, I haven't finished speaking yet. Where are you taking me? After Muyu was taken away, Xiao Chun and Jingyu suddenly felt that the world was peaceful again. Xiao Chen's expression gradually improved. Dad, Mom, where is Uncle Mu going? The two little guys who were eating happily on the soft couch asked curiously. Oh, your Uncle Mu is sick. Sixth uncle is taking him to see a doctor. Jingyu smiled at Xiaozin and Xiaozin. Uncle Mu said something wrong and Dad got angry, so he was taken away. Xiao Ziyan swallowed the food in her mouth silently and said seriously. Jing Yu's mouth twitched when she heard Xiao Ziyan's words. Hey! Xiao Ziyan was stunned when he heard these two answers. Cough, cough. Let's eat. Jing Yu decisively chose to shut her mouth and reached out to pick up food for the two children. Xiao Ziyan was a complete replica of Xiao Chen. It was fine if she didn't speak, but when she did, it was like a lightning bolt. Jing Yu felt an incomparable sense of worry. The two little guys wanted to sleep with Jing Yu and Xiao Chen, but the possessive Xiao Chen threw them into another room. Then, he closed the door and went to sleep with Jing Yu in his arms. I don't have to give away my wife. That's great. Jing Yu was completely speechless at Xiao Chen's actions, but her protests were completely ineffective. Fortunately, the two little guys were very well behaved and didn't make any noise. The two little guys were sleeping soundly on one side. Early in the morning, Jing Yu and Xiao Chen were still sleeping when they heard the sound of the door opening. Then, two little figures climbed into Jing Yu and Xiao Chen's bed. Daddy, Mommy. The two little guys didn't say anything and crawled into Jing Yu and Xiao Chen's quilt. Xiao Chen had to let go of Jing Yu. Looking at the two little guys crawling into the quilt, he slightly frowned. Jing Yu looked like she was still half asleep. Why are you up so early? Jing Yu patted Xiao Ziyan's head and planted a kiss on Xiao Ziyan's white and tender cheek. Then, she looked at the two little guys and asked. After being kissed by Jing Yu, Xiao Ziyan was immediately satisfied and crawled into Jing Yu's arms. Xiao Chen frowned and reached out to pull Xiao Ziyan out. Before Xiao Ziyan could feel his mother's soft body, he was caught by Xiao Chen's big hand. Suddenly, he lowered his head and looked up at Xiao Chen. The father and son looked at each other and sparks flew everywhere. Chapter 21:16. When Jing Yu saw this scene, her eyes were full of smiles. She helplessly said, "What are you guys doing?" Xiao Chen and Xiao Ziyan silently looked at each other and continued to look at each other without saying a word. In the end, Xiao Ziyan seemed like she didn't want to look anymore. She yawned and closed her eyes. Then, she buried her head in Xiao Chen's arms. Although Xiao Chen had a look of disgust, he still reached out and covered himself with the quilt. "Did you sleep well last night?" Jing Yu calmly asked as she pinched Xiao Ziyan's little face. "Not good. The bed here is too hard." Xiao Ziyan's face was full of disgust as he unhappily said, "The bed here is not as soft as the one in the carriage that Uncle Mu gave me." Oh! Jing Yu suddenly chuckled. Mu Yu really knew how to enjoy life. The family of four rolled around on the bed for a long time. After talking for a while, Jing Yu and Xiao Chen helped the two little guys get dressed. While Mu Yu was anxiously waiting for him, he finally arrived. "You guys are finally up. This young master's teapot is almost empty." Mu Yu looked at Jing Yu and Xiao Chen with hidden bitterness and said, "Isn't it better to drink until you're full?" Jing Yu rolled her eyes indifferently. She watched as Xiao Chen carried the two children to a chair. Then, she slowly sat down and looked at Mu Yu and asked, "Why did you come here instead of staying in the northern pastoral? Only you guys are allowed to go sightseeing, but I'm not allowed to go out?" Mu Yu said with disgust. "Looking at you guys getting married and having children, this young master is still alone. This time, I came out to bring a beauty back to get married." Jing Yu frowned and asked curiously, "I remember. Aren't your wives and concubines in the Mu Palace?" "Nonsense." When Mu Yu heard Jing Yu's words, he suddenly jumped up and angrily said, "Those women were forced on me by others. I have no other intentions towards them. The one I'm looking for must be a woman that I love deeply." Jing Yu looked at Mu Yu's serious appearance, and the corner of her mouth slightly twitched. Looking at Mu Yu's appearance, Jing Yu was really worried about Mu Yu's trip. But this guy actually found a Tokyo in the northern pastoral. "I see that you guys are going to the Roman forest?" Mu Yu changed the topic and asked as he looked at Jing Yu and Xiao Chen. "That's right." Jing Yu nodded slowly and said, "Now that there's nothing to do, I want to go to the Roman forest to play. Maybe I'll stay in the forest for a long time. Yin Jin and Yin Feng's children can take advantage of this opportunity to raise them well." TSK, TSK, TSK. Mu Yu was speechless when he heard Jing Yu's words. Only Jing Yu would bring her children to the forest, and only Xiao Chen would allow Jing Yu to do as she pleased. However, there didn't seem to be any harm in the forest. Thinking about how Jingyu came out of the forest and was already so powerful, these two children definitely wouldn't be too bad. Just as Jingyu and Muyu were talking, Third Xing suddenly rushed in. His strange expression immediately attracted the attention of Jingyu and Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen looked at Third Xing and asked, "What happened?" Chapter 21:17. Master, we just received news from the Crown Prince of the Imperial City. Third Xing said quietly, the Crown Prince has written a memorial to remove the 9th Emperors from his position and take over the Imperial residence. The Emperor has decreed him to be Prince Qingping. In addition, the Crown Prince has broken up the entire Xing alliance and rebuilt it. We have been abandoned. Third Xing was on the verge of tears when he said this. He had only come out with his master once, yet he had been abandoned? He didn't even have an organization anymore. What did you just say? The Crown Prince has written a memorial to remove the 9th Emperors from his position? Muyu was shocked when he heard this. He looked at Third Xing and Xiao Chen in horror. The son had removed the father from his position? Most importantly, the emperor had agreed and even decreed him to be Prince Qingping. Muyu felt as if his worldview had been refreshed. He looked at Xiao Chen, wanting to see Xiao Chen's expression. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen's face was completely calm. He didn't have any other emotions. Brother Crown Prince has become Prince Qingping. Is he a very powerful official? Xiao Xin, who was on the side, asked excitedly. Yes, your brother Crown Prince is now an official with a higher rank than father. Jingyu's eyes were full of smiles. Her gloating expression made Xiao Chen unhappy. He cursed in his heart. This traitorous brat, madam. There's one more thing. Third Xing calmed himself down and said, the Crown Prince has bought all the businesses under madam's name. He's using madam's son's name. Now, all of madam's businesses are under the Crown Prince's name. The novel that madam wanted to publish has also been taken over by the Crown Prince. In other words, madam has nothing now. After Third Xing said this, Jingyu felt as if she had been struck by lightning. What did you say? Jingyu almost jumped up. Those businesses were all Jingyu's assets. It would be fine if they were gone, but the novel was copied and printed. It was the story of Jingyu and Xiao Chen. Jingyu had asked someone to write it for nearly a year. It was currently selling like hotcakes. She didn't expect it to be taken away by Xiao Bai in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Jingyu's heart was filled with a huge fuck. Third Xing's words of having nothing immediately provoked Jingyu. What did Xiao Bai say? When Xiao Chen heard that Jingyu's property was also taken away, he immediately felt much better. Others might not know, but Xiao Chen knew that that money was Jingyu's life. Xiao Bai's torment had definitely taken away half of Jingyu's life. The Crown Prince said that inheriting his father's position would allow him to do things better. With enough money, he would be able to walk more smoothly in the official circles. The Crown Prince also said that Master and Madam don't have to go back. The Prince's mansion has been demolished and rebuilt. There's no place for Master and Madam to stay. After Third Xing said this, Muyu was completely dumbfounded. He turned to look at Jingyu and Xiao Chen, who were equally dumbfounded. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha ha ha. You guys will have such a day too. Ha 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 ha. You've been tricked by your own son. Ha 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 ha. Muyu's wild laughter successfully made Jingyu and Xiao Chen turn around. Chapter 21:18. Are you laughing? Jingyu gritted her teeth as she stared at Muyu. Ha 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 ha. I really can't help it. Look at you, the 9th Emperors and the Imperial concubine with different pupils were actually tricked by their own sons. Now, not only are they penniless, they can't even go home. Ha ha ha. Jingyu listened to Muyu's words. She suddenly felt the muscles on her face twitching fiercely. She took a deep breath and said, "Drag him away." Muyu was dragged away while laughing wildly. Jingyu confirmed with Third Xing again and again, and finally found out that Xiao Bai really didn't leave any leeway. He was telling Jingyu and Xiao Chen not to go back to the Tokyo. Xiao Bai has really grown up. Jingyu sat at the table and said with a sigh, "That's good." Xiao Chen leaned back slightly and said calmly, "With Xiao Bai in the Tokyo, it seems like there's nothing for us to do. You can rest assured now, right?" "I still feel uncomfortable." When I first found him on the island, he didn't know anything. Jingyu let out a deep sigh. There was a faint nostalgia in her eyes. Unknowingly, so many years had already passed. That little child from back then had now grown into an adult. I've already said that Xiaobai is very suitable. Xiao Chen reached out and held Jingyu's hand and said calmly. Jingyu smiled helplessly, but she also felt relieved. After Jingyu and Xiao Chen packed up, they prepared to leave. The carriage that the two little brats stole from Muyu, there was no reason for them to return it. In addition, Jingyu and Xiao Chen were poor. The carriage had to be left behind, so Muyu was robbed. Jingyu and Xiao Chen took the two children and left. On the way to the Roman forest, Jingyu slightly lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at the distant city behind her. There was a faint sadness in her eyes, but when she felt Xiaozin snuggling into her arms, his cute appearance made Jingyu's mouth blossom with a smile again. Isn't this what Jingyu has always wanted? To be able to leave the hustle and bustle of the city. Jingyu had too many concerns. Now, Xiaobai directly cut off Jingyu's escape route, and also told Jingyu and Xiao Chen that they can do what they want to do without worry. How could Jingyu not understand Xiaobai's meaning? Everything seemed to be the same in the Roman forest. However, the outer perimeter of the forest had been baptized by the flames of war. Even after such a long time, one could still see some traces of it. When Jingyu entered the forest, she immediately sold off the golden horse carriage and exchanged it for a lot of silver notes. Only then did he feel a little more confident. Nothing changed in the depths of the forest, but the grass and leaves became more lush. Jingyu stood under the tree and reached out her hand to touch the trunk of the big tree. The corner of her mouth revealed a faint smile. The joy that came from inside made Jingyu feel comfortable. Father, is this the place where Mother used to live? Why is there no house? Xiaozin looked at the lush trees and the small body sitting on the silver arrow. He looked around with some doubts. Because Mother is waiting for little Potato to build the house. Jingyu turned her head and looked at Xiaozin with a smile and said, let's build the house on the tree, okay? Chapter 21:19. Wow, a house on a tree. Good, good. Xiaozin suddenly jumped up and down in excitement. Xiaozian's face was also filled with excitement. Jingyu and Xiao Chen looked at the happy faces of Xiaozin and Xiaozian, and their eyes were filled with smiles. Within the Roman forest, it seemed that with the arrival of Jingyu and Xiao Chen, it became noisy. In the depths of the forest, pleasant laughter could often be heard. Jingyu said that it was not fun to wear a sparrow. Jingyu really built a house on a tree. Jingyu liked the big tree very much. On the tree trunk, there were several houses built. These were the residences of Jingyu and Xiao Chen. 3rd Xing, 6th Xing, and the others were all chased away by Xiao Chen and Jingyu. Of course, they were only chased away after the houses were built. There were 3 small houses. Jingyu and Xiao Chen's house was on the largest tree trunk. Xiaozin and Xiaozian's house was next to each other, but they were separated. These 2 little guys seriously said that they wanted to live separately. Jingyu and Xiao Chen were naturally happy to see this. The forest was silent. As the gray wolves leaped, time seemed to pass little by little. Throughout the year, there was always the person you loved by your side. Everything seemed so perfect. On a long slope, Jingyu wore a very simple dress. She walked up step by step with light steps. When she looked up, she could see 3 pine trees standing proudly on the top of the mountain. Where? A call came from behind. Mother, wait for us. Jingyu's footsteps paused. When she turned around, she saw 2 gray wolves rushing up. After circling around Jingyu, they quickly ran to the top of the mountain. Xiao Chen, dressed in black, walked towards Jingyu unhurriedly. Xiaozin and Xiaozian also trotted towards Jingyu with their short legs. Slow down. Jingyu looked helplessly at the 2 children who were covered in dirt from playing. The tenderness in her eyes could not disappear. Xiao Chen came forward and held Jingyu's hand. Then, the 2 of them walked towards the top of the hill. The 2 children were followed by 4 wolf pups. They ran happily to the top of the mountain. On the top of the mountain, there were 3 tombstones. The names on the tombstones were Jingyu's parents, Jingyu and his wife, Qiyun. The last one was the tomb of the she-wolf who saved Jingyu. There were no weeds on the 3 tombstones. It could be seen that Jingyu and Xiao Chun often came here to take care of the tombstones. Jingyu took Xiao Qian and the two children and respectfully bowed in front of the tombstones. Then, she sat down under a pine tree and looked up at the sky and trees in the distance. The corners of her mouth curved slightly. The she-wolf likes to look from here. Now that she has her parents with her, she won't be lonely. Jingyu slightly lowered her eyes and looked up at Xiao Chun. She said, "Do you blame me for dragging you to live in the deep mountains? What nonsense are you talking about?" Xiao Chun frowned in dissatisfaction. He hugged Jingyu and said deeply, "With you by my side for the rest of my life, even if I have to live in hell, I will still be very happy." Fool. When Jingyu heard Xiao Chun's words, she suddenly smiled. Her eyes were filled with deep affection. She looked at the mountain forest in the distance and suddenly felt a little absent-minded. When did she and Xiao Chun meet? Chapter 21:20. Daddy, Mommy, did you meet each other here? How did you meet each other? Xiao Xin was tired from playing with the wolf pups. He happily got into the arms of Jingyu and Xiao Chun and asked curiously while blinking his eyes, "Us?" When Jingyu heard Xiao Xin's question, she was slightly stunned. Then, she absent-mindedly said, "That was a long time ago. At that time, your mommy was only 14 years old." Jingyu's gaze was very distant. She looked at the mountains in the distance and thought of the first time she met Xiao Chen. She took Jian out to hunt, but she didn't expect to meet Xiao Chen. Originally, she thought it was just a fleeting moment, but she didn't expect to get herself into big trouble. When they first met, they were hunted down in the whole city. Then, she felt embarrassed when she fell into Xiao Chen's bath. Finally, he protected her again and again in the imperial city. Jingyu never knew that a person could penetrate into her life little by little. From then on, it was unforgettable. At first, it didn't matter. Later, Xiao Chun protected her again and again. He fought against the emperor and the imperial concubines. It was as if he always tolerated her. "Xiao Chun, when did you fall in love with me?" Jingyu seemed to be in a trance as she asked. "When I first met you, it was probably deep in my bones." Xiao Chen's answer was deep and distant. That kind of amazement didn't come from the eyes, but from the heart. Jingyu suddenly smiled. Since they met in the imperial city, when she looked for her father and learned the truth, she hesitated and hesitated. How did she fall in love with him in the end? She thought more than once that she didn't belong to this world. How could she be worthy of love? Later, she thought about why she didn't look at the present and only thought about the future. Now, Jingyu only rejoiced in her heart. Fortunately, the man she accepted was so outstanding. Since they were in love, twists and turns and quarrels were inevitable. Now that she thought about it, she felt that everything she had experienced back then was actually so wonderful. When Tokyo was discovered, this man continued to protect her without hesitation. He did not care about his reputation and protected her wholeheartedly. He allowed her to do whatever she wanted. Even though Tokyo was the city he had protected wholeheartedly, he did not hesitate to abandon it. Because that person was her. Jingyu was so lucky to have Xiao Chun by her side. "Mother, is this love?" Xiao Xin and Xiao Zian listened to Jingyu's long-winded story. It was as if they had heard it many times. But no matter how many times they listened to it, it was still vivid and moving. "Yes, it's love." Jingyu reached out and stroked the heads of the two little guys. "Does father love mother?" Xiao Xin turned to look at Xiao Chun and asked. "Love." Xiao Chun turned to look at Jingyu and said, "Deep love without regrets." Then, "Does mother love father?" When Xiao Xin heard Xiao Chen's answer, he immediately nodded with satisfaction. Once again, he turned his gaze to Jingyu. Xiao Chen also looked at Jingyu, waiting for her answer. "This?" Jingyu frowned and said, "This question, I need to think about it carefully." "Jingyu." Xiao Chen looked at Jingyu and suddenly gnashed his teeth. Jingyu exclaimed and quickly ran away. She laughed and said, "If you catch me, I will tell you the answer." "Ha ha ha." Xiao Chen looked at Jingyu, who ran away and helplessly lowered his head. In the end, he unconsciously smiled, stood up and chased after Jingyu. The two little guys shouted for their father to chase after them, and then shouted for their mother to run away. Amidst the laughter and the sound of the wind, Jingyu quietly looked at Xiao Chen with her pair of golden green eyes. She said she loved him very much. End of story. Chapter 21-21. The Tokyo had grown stronger, and the northern pastoral had maintained its status quo. Nothing seemed to have changed, but was there really no change behind this tranquility? No one knew. Perhaps Xiao Yuling knew, but didn't do anything about it. Xiao Yuling had once said that the world was only interesting when one competed with others. Now, in Xiao Yuling's opinion, it was meaningless, right? The world was still the world. Even after experiencing the destruction of a country, it didn't change the original state of the world. Everything in the northern pastoral was very quiet. After Hellion Theo became the emperor of the northern pastoral, the status quo had always been maintained. In the northern pastoral imperial palace, Hellion Theo sat on a wide dragon throne. He raised his hand and rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Your Majesty, it's getting late. You should rest early." The head eunuch standing by the side looked at Hellion Theo and said with a frown, "Okay." Hellion Theo raised his head. On his handsome face, there was a stubble on his chin. His originally beautiful face seemed to have a lot more charm. His fox-like eyes still carried an invisible charm. Hellion Theo slowly stood up and said, "I heard that the 9th emperors and the 9th imperial concubine of the Tokyo Imperial City have left the Tokyo Imperial City? Crown Prince Xiao Bai has been conferred the title of Prince Qingping?" Hellion Theo asked casually as he walked towards the sleeping quarters. "Yes, the 9th emperors is no longer in charge of the Prince Qingping residence," the head eunuch said respectfully. "You do have some ability." Hellion Theo smiled faintly. He turned his gaze away and didn't say anything else. Looking at the buildings and roads in the northern pastoral imperial palace, he suddenly felt a heavy fatigue. "There's no need to come in and serve me." Hellion Xiao turned his head and spoke very indifferently as he stepped into his bedchamber. That eunuch bowed in acknowledgement and watched as Hellion Xiao walked into his bedchamber. However, the words that were at the tip of his tongue didn't leave his mouth. The emperor had been back for so many years. There were countless beauties in the harem, but the emperor had never summoned any of them. The position of the empress had always been empty. In the past, the head eunuch would ask about it from time to time, but there was no result. Now that he saw the emperor's appearance, he was incomparably anxious. The head eunuch let out a long sigh, if there was something wrong with the emperor or not. Of course, Hellion Xiao didn't know that the head eunuch by his side actually held this kind of thought. Presumably, if he knew, he'd definitely chop this damned eunuch in a matter of minutes. He actually suspected that there was a problem with his own ability. Inside the sleeping quarters, Hellion Theo reached out to undo his outer robe. Just as he was about to take it off, his arms suddenly stiffened. A cold expression flashed across his face. He slowly turned around and saw the tall figure standing under the beaded curtain enter Hellion Theo's line of sight. "You." Hellion Theo's eyes widened little by little. He looked at the familiar figure walking over with heavy footsteps. The expression on his face cracked a little. He called out in astonishment, "Feng Maching?" "It's me." Feng Maching was wearing a dark purple robe. He was tall and his black hair was casually tied up. Chapter 21-22. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo with a deep and serene gaze. The stillness in his eyes caused Hellion Theo's heart to skip a beat. "What are you doing here?" Hellion Theo turned his head away uncomfortably and said, "You? What are you doing here? This is the Northern Pastoral Palace. If you're caught, even 10 heads won't be enough for you to be beheaded." Hellion Theo silently took a deep breath and suppressed the uncontrollable emotions in his heart. After so many years, she originally thought that those feelings would settle down little by little with time. However, she didn't expect that those feelings that she thought had settled down would collapse the moment this person appeared. "With you around, would you be willing to let me die?" Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo's expression and suddenly smiled. The corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile. The gaze he looked at Hellion Theo with was scorching and deep, causing Hellion Theo's heart to tremble violently. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Hellion Theo forced himself to calm down and clenched his fists slightly. "It's been 5 years, Hellion Theo." Feng Maching walked towards Hellion Theo step by step and said, I've traveled thousands of miles and seen the fickleness of the world. I've restrained myself from rushing back to look for you countless times. However, all of these, the moment I heard the slightest bit of news about you, I came without hesitation. I came here today to ask you only one question. Feng Maching stood in front of Hellion Theo. The two of them were only a step apart. Feng Maching quietly looked at Hellion Theo and said, "Tell me, in these 5 years, you haven't doted on a single concubine, haven't touched a single person, and why is the position of the Empress empty? You. How could you?" After hearing Feng Maching's words, Hellion Theo's eyes suddenly widened. Then, as if he had thought of something, he gritted his teeth and said, "You asked the people from the Constellation Palace to investigate me." That's right." Feng Maching shrugged casually and said, "I did investigate you. How could Su Yu and Xing Yi agree to such a rude request?" Hellion Theo was so angry that the roots of his teeth itched. After saying this, he suddenly froze and abruptly raised his head to look at Feng Maching. Looking at Feng Maching's calm and serious gaze, he suddenly had a bad premonition. "Oh, I'm just speaking the truth." Feng Maching's lips curled into a faint smile. Hellion Theo's face stiffened for a moment, then looked at Feng Maching coldly and said, "You bastard. What did I do?" Feng Maching said very innocently, "I just asked Su Yu about the Northern Pastoral Emperor. She said that Jingyu wanted to know. Can I say that?" Feng Maching slightly curved his eyebrows and said with a smile, "That's it?" Hellion Theo was stunned when he heard Feng Maching's words. "If it's not that, do you want me to say something else?" Feng Maching silently took another step forward. Hellion Theo hurriedly retreated, and a trace of embarrassment appeared on his face. He glared at Feng Maching and said, "I'm just afraid that you'll say something you shouldn't say." "Oh? What should I say that I shouldn't say?" Why don't you tell me?" Feng Maching approached step by step, and Hellion Theo retreated somewhat pathetically. In the end, when he was almost forced onto the dragon bed, Hellion Theo shouted, "Enough! This is the Northern Pastoral, not your territory." Hellion Theo took a deep breath and said, Chapter 21-23. "Oh." Feng Maching suddenly stopped in his tracks. With his hands behind his back, he looked at Hellion Theo and said, "You still haven't answered my question. Why didn't you choose an empress? Why didn't you enter the harem?" "That's my business. What does it have to do with you?" Hellion Theo turned his head away stiffly. "If you don't leave, I'll call for help." Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo's nervous expression and smiled faintly. He said calmly, "Hellion Theo, I'll make you admit it sooner or later." After Feng Maching finished speaking, he turned around and left. After Hellion Xiao saw that Feng Maching had left, he slowly heaved a sigh of relief. Unknowingly, he was actually so nervous. The beating of his heart in his chest was so clear. Hellion Xiao did not know why, but when he looked at the empty palace, he felt a strong sense of loss. This feeling made Hellion Xiao very uncomfortable. After taking a deep breath, he suppressed the churning thoughts in his heart. The next morning, "Did your majesty not rest well last night? Do you want this servant to cancel the morning court session?" The head eunuch asked worriedly when he saw the dark circles under Hellion Theo's eyes. After so many years, this was the first time he saw the emperor like this. "We're fine. Let's go." Hellion Theo frowned slightly and raised his hand to rub his eyebrows. This was the first time in many years that he couldn't sleep because of someone. Hellion Theo was a little irritated. He kept thinking about Feng Maching, who appeared last night, and what Feng Maching said. By the end of the day, almost everyone felt that Hellion Xiao was absent-minded. The head eunuch also broke out in a cold sweat for Hellion Xiao. Fortunately, there were no major problems. At night, Hellion Xiao dragged his tired body back to his own bedroom. "Did you miss me so much that you lost your appetite? Absent-minded?" Just as Hellion Theo entered the inner chamber, he heard a familiar voice. It made Hellion Theo's body freeze again. "Why is it you again?" Hellion Theo frowned and said unhappily, "You didn't sleep last night? You're also absent-minded today. It seems like you really miss me." Feng Maching moved closer to Hellion Theo to take a look. He was so close that Hellion Theo was shocked. Just as he was about to dodge, Feng Maching straightened his body. Seeing that you missed me so much, I naturally came as you wished. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Xiao with a smile and said. Hellion Xiao looked at Feng Maching's expression and frowned, feeling very conflicted. He opened his mouth and said, My palace's defense is so weak? Even a second-rate expert like you couldn't stop him? Second-rate? Feng Maching's face darkened. He looked at Hellion Theo with displeasure and asked, In your eyes, I'm just a second-rate? Am I wrong? Hellion Theo smiled faintly and said, Can you beat Xiao Qin? Feng Maching suddenly fell silent. A feeling of displeasure rose in his heart. So he was being looked down upon? However, Hellion Theo's words seemed to make sense. He really couldn't beat Xiao Qin. Although it was the truth, why did Feng Maching feel so uncomfortable when it came from Hellion Theo's mouth? Chapter 21-24. Feng Maching was silent. It's good that I can beat you. What does Xiao Qin have to do with me? Feng Maching said quietly. The meaning behind his words made Hellion Theo's heart skip a beat. His heartbeat instantly accelerated. I have nothing to do with you. Hellion Theo turned around and said, I want to take a bath. Leave quickly. What a coincidence. I also want to take a bath. Why don't we do it together? Feng Maching said with a smile as he looked at Hellion Theo. You damned lecher. Get lost. Hellion Theo's beautiful face flushed red. His flustered and exasperated voice sounded. Hellion Theo probably forgot to control his volume and alerted the people outside the hall. Immediately, they heard the questioning voice from outside the hall. Hellion Theo was startled, but he quickly stabilized himself and said, I'm fine. There's no need to come in. Feng Maching stood to the side and looked at Hellion Theo's appearance. His pitch-black eyes unconsciously softened and a faint smile appeared on his face. Looking at Hellion Theo's every move seemed to be pleasing to the eye. Why are you still standing there? Leave quickly. Are you waiting for someone to catch you? Hellion Theo turned around and saw that Feng Maching was still standing at the same spot. He was instantly furious and shouted anxiously. After hearing Hellion Theo's words, Feng Maching smiled calmly. I'll come and find you tomorrow. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo and said before turning around and leaving, Who wants you to come? Hellion Xiao spoke with a look of disdain, but the faint smile at the corners of his mouth could not be concealed no matter what. For many days in a row, Feng Maching came every night. Hellion Theo chased Feng Maching away again and again, but he couldn't stop Feng Maching at all. Hellion Theo was also helpless. Until recently, Feng Maching, who came every day, suddenly stopped coming. After not seeing Feng Maching for 3 days in a row, Hellion Theo, who didn't care at first, suddenly felt uneasy. Your Majesty, it's time to eat. This was the umpteenth time the head eunuch had said this to Hellion Theo. It was already late when Hellion Theo sat on the dragon throne, but Hellion Theo didn't seem to have any intention of eating. No need. Let's leave. I'm not hungry. Hellion Theo waved his hand in annoyance. What he was thinking was, did Feng Maching just appear randomly and disappear again? At the thought of this, Hellion Theo felt suffocated. He put down the memorial in his hand in annoyance, stood up, and walked in the back garden. He looked at the dark night sky and unconsciously clenched his fists. His brows were tightly knitted, as if they had never relaxed. The head eunuch who followed Hellion Xiao looked at Hellion Xiao's appearance and also frowned. A few days ago, the emperor seemed to be in a good mood. Why did he become like this these few days? Your Majesty, is there something you're worried about? The head eunuch asked cautiously. Hellion Theo was silent for a moment. He looked into the distance and asked absent-mindedly, Do you know what it feels like to like someone? When Hellion Xiao asked this question, the head eunuch was immediately dumbfounded. He furrowed his brows slightly in silence, as if he was considering how to answer. He furrowed his brows slightly and said, This servant has entered the palace since I was young. What is the feeling of liking someone? This servant truly does not know. Chapter 21-25. This servant is just a eunuch. I don't have the right to like anyone. After the chief eunuch spoke, he suddenly thought of something. He looked at Hellion Theo in surprise and asked, "Your Majesty, do you have someone you like?" "No." Hellion Shio was questioned by the head eunuch. His heart suddenly jumped fiercely, as if he was trying to hide something. He quickly said a sentence, then turned around and walked away, saying, "Let's go back to the palace." It was hard for the chief eunuch not to be suspicious when he saw Hellion Theo's reaction. He looked at Hellion Theo in horror and watched as Hellion Theo entered the palace. His eyes widened as if he had thought of something. Why did His Majesty's words sound like he was begging for something but couldn't get it? The chief eunuch immediately thought of the time when Hellion Theo said that he wanted to marry Jingyu. When the 9th imperial concubine wasn't the 9th imperial concubine, and when His Majesty was still a prince, didn't he? Could it be that His Majesty is still thinking about the 9th imperial concubine? So after so many years, he was still thinking about the 9th imperial concubine and didn't even go to the harem? The more the chief eunuch thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. His eyes were filled with worry. If Jingyu wasn't the 9th imperial concubine, it would be easy to handle. However, Jingyu was the 9th imperial concubine and was even the mother of 2 children. He didn't even want to think about it. At this moment, the head eunuch's heart was broken. If Hellion Shio knew that his casual question had actually caused this person's imagination to run wild like this, he would definitely control his own mouth next time. Hellion Shio very calmly stepped into his own bedroom. When he stepped into the palace today, he sensed a different smell. There was a faint smell of blood. Hellion Theo's expression instantly changed. When he turned around and entered the inner room, he immediately saw the man lying on the ground. His body was covered in blood, and there was incense burning in the room. The smell was very strong, and the pale face on the ground was none other than Feng Maching. Damn it! Hellion Theo's heart almost jumped out when he saw this scene. He quickly went forward to help Feng Maching sit up and check the wound on Feng Maching's body. Fortunately, the wound wasn't deep, but there was a lot of blood. At first glance, it was obvious that the wound had not been bandaged for a long time. "Are you crazy?" Hellion Theo's eyes were full of anger as he said, "You could have bandaged yourself, so why didn't you? Waiting for death?" Cough, cough. Feng Maching narrowed his eyes weakly, looked at Hellion Theo, and said, "If I bandaged myself, how could I play the trick of injuring myself in front of you?" "You." Hellion Theo took a deep breath and didn't say anything else. He helped Feng Maching sit down on a chair at the side and quickly rummaged through the cabinets to find something like an emergency bandage. Feng Maching panted slightly and glanced at the wounds on his body. He reached out and took off his clothes with difficulty. The exposed upper body had a rather deep wound on the left side of his chest. Other than this wound, one could also see that Feng Maching had many scars on his body. If this wound was a little deeper, you would have gone to see the King of Hell. Hellion Theo looked at Feng Maching's wound with a slightly cold expression. "This young master is lucky. How can I bear to see the King of Hell before I marry you?" Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo, who was applying medicine for him, and a faint smile appeared in his eyes as he said calmly. Chapter 21-26. Hellion Theo's face instantly turned cold when he heard that. He reached out and pressed down hard. "Be gentle," Feng Maching hurriedly said. His face turned even paler. Looking at Hellion Theo's embarrassed and angry look, he didn't know why, but he actually felt that it was so cute. Looking at Hellion Theo's serious look of bandaging the wound, he slightly arched his eyebrows. "Who did it?" Hellion Theo asked after bandaging the wound. "Who doesn't have an enemy in the pugilistic world?" Feng Maching said casually. He reached out and put on his clothes before saying, "I was just careless and got ambushed. Don't worry, I will settle this score sooner or later." Hellion Theo glanced at Feng Maching when he heard that. After a moment of silence, he frowned and asked, "What have you been doing for so many days?" When Feng Maching heard Hellion Theo's question, he turned his head to look at Hellion Theo in surprise and asked, "Are you concerned about me? I just want to know when you will die next time." Hellion Theo smiled coldly. These words made Feng Maching feel very amused. Looking at Hellion Theo's obviously concerned expression, but he just didn't admit it. It was really funny. "Didn't I just say that I didn't marry?" Feng Maching was about to speak when Helian Theo glanced at him coldly. Feng Maching immediately changed the topic and said very calmly, "How can I die without marrying a wife?" Helian Theo looked at Feng Maching's shameless expression. He was so angry that the roots of his teeth itched, but there was nothing he could do. Feng Maching was seriously injured, so he naturally stayed in Helian Theo's bedroom. Helian Theo almost never left the bedroom. Even if he went out, he ordered that no one was allowed to enter. Food and other things were sent in. The servants outside could clearly feel that their emperor's appetite had increased. After half a month, Feng Maching's injuries were almost healed. Helian Theo helped Feng Maching change his dressing as usual. Looking at the wounds that were almost healed, he nodded in satisfaction. "It's almost healed. You can leave now." Helian Theo didn't hesitate to chase him away. "Ouch. It hurts. It's not healed yet." Feng Maching said nothing and lay down again. Helian Theo looked at Feng Maching's face. He had never seen such a thick-skinned person. Just when Helian Theo was about to speak, he heard the chief eunuch's voice came from outside. Your Majesty, concubine sent someone to bring some snacks." Helian Theo frowned when he heard that. Just as he was about to refuse, Feng Maching stopped him and said happily, "I'm hungry. Bring it in. If you don't want to eat, I'll eat it." Helian Theo looked at Feng Maching's matter-of-fact expression and was so angry that he didn't recover for a long time. However, when he turned around, he asked the servant to put the food down. After the servant left, Helian Theo brought the soup in and placed it beside Feng Maching. TSK. You're really lucky." Feng Maching looked at the soup and stared at Helian Theo with a strange expression. He narrowed his eyes and said, "So many women are throwing themselves at you, but you're indifferent. Why?" "It has nothing to do with you." Helian Theo turned around with a cold expression when he heard that. Feng Maching stood up with a dark expression and frowned when he saw Helian Theo's back facing him. Chapter 21-27. Helian Theo, admit it. You're the same as me. Feng Maching looked at Helian Theo quietly and said, "You're no longer interested in women? Shut up." Helian Theo abruptly turned his head and glared at Feng Maching angrily. "Get out of here right now." Feng Maching looked at Helian Theo's flustered and exasperated look. For some reason, he suddenly smiled happily. He looked at Helian Theo quietly and said, "What are you afraid of? Why? It's not that you refuse to accept me and accept yourself." Helian Theo panted heavily and didn't say anything. He clenched his fists tightly by his side. Feng Maching didn't drink the soup and left just like that. He left as suddenly as he had arrived. They hadn't seen each other for a month. Helian Theo's birthday came, and the whole country was celebrating. There were banquets and singing and dancing. The young women at the banquet were trying their best to please Helian Theo. However, Helian Xiao turned a blind eye to it. That cold and detached appearance of his had broken the hearts of countless women. "Are you tired, Your Majesty?" A soft voice drifted over. Helian Xiao slightly paused his hand that was drinking wine. He turned his head to look and saw a beautiful woman dressed in decent clothes looking at him with a face full of concern. "I'm fine. Concubine Jing, come with me to the back garden." Helian Theo stood up and said. Concubine Jing seemed to be surprised when she heard this. Then, a look of surprise appeared in her eyes. She quickly stood up and complied. Some of the concubines below saw this scene and were immediately envious. The emperor treated everyone the same, but concubine Jing was different. She was always by the emperor's side. Seeing the two of them walk away hand in hand, the officials burst into tears. The emperor was finally enlightened. Northern Pastoral had an heir. Concubine Jing stayed by Helian Theo's side. Time hadn't left much of a mark on Helian Theo. She was still as beautiful as ever. Her long and narrow eyes were even more charming. Helian Theo sighed deeply and strolled in the garden without saying a word. Helian Theo didn't say anything, so concubine Jing naturally didn't dare to say anything. She just quietly stayed by Helian Theo's side. "How long have you been in the palace?" Helian Theo suddenly asked as he walked. Replying to Your Majesty, Chunxia has been in the palace for 7 years. Concubine Jing bowed in response. Her tone sounded calm, but the resentment in her voice was still there. Hellion Theo turned around and looked at concubine Jing. Her pretty face made him feel comfortable. "Serve me in Longxiang Palace tonight," Hellion Theo said before he turned around and left. Concubine Jing was left standing there in shock. Her heart raced uncontrollably at that very moment. 7 years. Concubine Jing had thought that she had no chance at all. The cold treatment she had received over the past 7 years was enough to dishearten anyone. However, she didn't expect the emperor to change so much during these days. The day that concubine Jing had been waiting for had finally come. When the head eunuch heard the news, he was so excited that he almost jumped up. He hurriedly called for people to come and change the bedding in the palace. He even lit incense. After Hellion Xiao returned from the study room, he saw the changes in the room. Immediately, he frowned, feeling extremely conflicted. "Muda, did you do this?" Hellion Theo called out with a cold face. Chapter 21-28. Your servant specially prepared it for your majesty, he. Muda was the head eunuch's name. When he heard Hellion Theo calling out to him, he immediately chuckled and came up to him. Hellion Theo's face instantly darkened when he saw how eager Muda was to take credit. "Are you tired of living?" Hellion Theo said coldly as he looked at Muda. "Please spare me, your majesty. Concubine Jing is already waiting for your majesty's favor in the inner room," Muda quickly said when he saw that his attempt at flattery had failed. Scram. Hellion Theo spat out a single word and walked in with cold steps. Hellion Theo suddenly felt very strange when he smelled the ambiguous fragrance in the room and looked at the meticulously prepared gauze canopy. He stopped at the side of the bed and couldn't go forward no matter what. "Your Majesty?" A soft voice called out to him. It was obvious that concubine Jing had just finished bathing. She was wearing a light gauze, and her faintly discernible skin was extremely seductive. Any man who saw her would have thoughts about her. However, Hellion Xiao was unmoved. "What are you thinking, your majesty? Do I look good?" Concubine Jing took a deep breath when she saw Hellion Theo standing there unmoving. Then, she boldly walked up to Hellion Theo and reached out to hook her arms around Hellion Theo's neck. Concubine Jing had some confidence in her looks and figure. She didn't believe that the emperor wouldn't be moved by her seductive appearance. Hellion Theo looked at concubine Jing quietly and tried to convince himself over and over again. Just as he was about to reach out and hug her, he saw a black shadow flash before his eyes. Then, concubine Jing, who had her arms around his neck, was knocked unconscious. "Feng Maching, are you crazy?" Hellion Xiao's eyes were filled with astonishment as he looked at Feng Maching, who had barged in, and then looked at the person who had been knocked unconscious by Feng Maching without hesitation. The astonishment in his eyes could not be concealed. "I am crazy." Feng Maching's face was filled with anger as he said, "If the people from the Constellation Palace didn't inform me, were you planning to make this woman your empress tonight?" Constellation Palace? Hellion Theo was stunned. Why would the Constellation Palace even inquire about such matters? "Yes." Feng Maching kicked concubine Jing away with a look of disdain. He stared at Hellion Theo coldly and said, "Everyone knows about my feelings for you. Only you turned a blind eye." Feng Maching, you. When Hellion Theo heard Feng Maching's words, he was so shocked that he was completely speechless. His face was full of panic. "I was too foolish to allow you to slowly accept me. Now, it seems that this won't work." After saying that, Feng Maching glanced coldly at concubine Jing, who was lying on the ground. His eyes were filled with disgust. "Jin Cheng, throw this woman somewhere else. You know what to do." As soon as Feng Maching finished speaking, another person appeared from the darkness. Hellion Theo's eyebrows twitched as he watched from the side. He suddenly realized how bad the security in his palace was. It wasn't enough for Feng Maching to come in alone. He even brought in a subordinate? "Yes." Jin Cheng responded respectfully. He reached out to grab the unconscious concubine Jing and ran out of the window. Then, only Feng Maching and Hellion Theo were left in the room. "Now, it's time for us to settle the score." Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo calmly and said, Chapter 21-29. What are you trying to do? Hellion Theo looked at Feng Maching, who was approaching him, and immediately retreated with vigilance. He frowned slightly. First, tell me what you did when I wasn't around for a month. Feng Maching wasn't in a hurry. He just looked at Hellion Theo quietly and asked in a very calm tone. It sounded like a greeting between good friends. However, there was a strange tone in his words. Why did he sound like he was questioning him? Do I need to report to you what I did? Hellion Theo pursed his lips and stared at Feng Maching. Didn't you leave? What are you doing here? Leave. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo and said, Are you chasing me away? You chased me away once 5 years ago. Now you want to chase me away again? Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo and frowned deeply. He stepped closer to Hellion Theo and asked, Do you hate me so much? If that's the case, then kill me. Feng Maching. Hellion Theo looked at the dagger Feng Maching took out and his expression changed. Why can't you bear to? Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo's nervous expression and smiled faintly. You. Hellion Theo looked at Feng Maching and was speechless for a long time. Feng Maching wasn't in a hurry. He just stood there and looked at Hellion Theo quietly. Where did your men take concubine Jing? Hellion Theo took a deep breath and asked. Killed her. Feng Maching's face turned cold when he heard Hellion Theo's question. He turned his head and said. Hellion Theo stared at Feng Maching. Feng Maching was a lunatic, so it was really possible for him to do such a thing. Hellion Theo didn't say anything and just stared at Feng Maching. If you're so concerned about a concubine, why don't you ask me where I've been for the past month? Feng Maching felt deeply hurt and glared at Hellion Theo. What does that have to do with me? Hellion Theo snorted and turned his head away. Hellion Theo, tell me why you won't accept me. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo quietly. Looking at the side of Hellion Theo's face, Feng Maching had initially thought that Hellion Theo hated him. However, over the past 5 years, he had seen it clearly. Hellion Theo didn't hate him. What he said back then was just to drive him away. Hearing Feng Maching's serious question, Hellion Theo's heart trembled slightly, but he stood there silently without saying a word. His heart was thumping, as if there were countless words he wanted to say, but he couldn't say a single word. Feng Maching, leave. Never come back. Hellion Theo was silent for a long time before he finally lowered his eyes and said, You know that I can't do it. Feng Maching answered firmly, I'm a man. I like women. Do you understand? Hellion Theo abruptly turned his head and glared at Feng Maching fiercely. Do you think I'll believe you? Feng Maching smiled disdainfully and said, That woman seduced you just now, but you didn't feel anything. Now you're telling me that you like a woman. Don't you think it's ridiculous? When Hellion Theo heard Feng Maching's words, it was as if he had been poked in a sore spot. His expression instantly turned ugly. All right, since you said that you like a woman, why don't we prove it? Chapter 21-30. Feng Maching suddenly smiled and calmly looked at Hellion Theo as he spoke. Hellion Theo was stunned when he heard that. He looked up at Hellion Theo and asked with a frown, What do you mean by that? That's exactly what I mean, Feng Maching said with a heavy gaze. He stepped forward and caught Hellion Theo off guard. He reached out to grab Hellion Theo's head and kissed him without saying a word. When those slightly cold thin lips pressed down, Hellion Theo's eyes suddenly widened. This kind of familiar touch, that scorching tongue that wandered around his own lips, caused Hellion Theo's mind to instantly go blank. Feng Maching, you lunatic. Get out. Get out. After Hellion Theo came back to his senses, he reached out and pushed Feng Maching away. Feng Maching was still immersed in the kiss and was pushed to the bed before he could react. Oh, so you're so wild. Feng Maching was stunned for a moment. Then, he looked at himself and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his eyes. He lay on the bed and said, I'm ready. Come. You. Hellion Theo was so angry that he didn't want to stay here any longer. He flicked his sleeves and turned around. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo's departing figure. His eyes darkened bit by bit. There was an unconcealable pain on his handsome face. He wasn't as relaxed as he was when he faced Hellion Theo. When concubine Jing woke up, she saw her own palace. She didn't feel uncomfortable at all. In other words, what she expected to happen last night didn't happen at all. Dongji, when did I come back? Concubine Jing rubbed her head and asked in a daze. Your Highness, His Majesty personally sent you back this morning. Dongji's face was full of excitement. Looking at her Nyang, she was very moved and said, His Majesty is so good to Nyang. Nyang should have a good rest. Oh! Concubine Jing's heart skipped a beat when she heard that. It was obvious that the emperor hadn't touched her, so why was he acting like this? Concubine Jing had no idea what was going on at all. She was ordered to serve the emperor in bed for the next few days, and she was sent home by the emperor himself every morning. Everyone said that Concubine Jing was the only one who was favored by the emperor, and that favor was bestowed upon her as well. She was made a noble consort and was in charge of the imperial harem. But only she knew that the emperor did not touch her at all. On the same night, Helian Xiao stepped into the bathing pool with exhaustion all over his body. The tiredness on the tip of his brows was difficult to conceal. Helian Xiao silently narrowed his eyes and looked at the mist above the pool. There was not the slightest emotion in his eyes. Footsteps sounded beside his ear, and they sounded very gentle. Your Majesty, this concubine is here to help your Majesty bathe. The person who came was naturally the newly promoted noble consort, Xiaqing. Helian Theo narrowed his eyes and didn't refuse. He let Xiaqing come over and reached out to help Helian Theo wipe his back. Looking at the side of Helian Theo's face, even a woman would be jealous of such a handsome face. Xiaqing's eyes were slightly silent. Her small hands were teasing him intentionally or unintentionally, causing Helian Xiao's eyes to twitch slightly. When he wanted to avoid it out of reflex, he seemed to have thought of something. His body did not move, and he allowed Xiaqing to do what she wanted. Your Majesty. Xiaqing leaned against Helian Theo and called out in a very delicate voice. Helian Theo's hands, which were hidden in the water, clenched slightly. Chapter 21:31. The scorching wine slid down Helian Theo's throat. His eyes became even more confused. It was as if he couldn't remember anything at this moment. But why was the figure in his mind so clear? Helian Xiao was somewhat angry as he fiercely swung his hand and fiercely smashed the wine jar in his hand onto the ground. Your Majesty. When Helian Theo flung the wine jar away, Muda was so shocked that he hurriedly knelt down. Helian Theo roared in annoyance. Scram! All of you, scram! Muda's eyes were filled with worry. He had no idea what was going on with Helian Theo. Looking at the wine on the ground, he didn't dare to say a word. If he angered the emperor, even if he had a few heads, it wouldn't be enough for him to chop off. He hurriedly waved his hand and dismissed everyone in the hall. In this incomparably spacious hall, Helian Theo took a step forward and sat on the stone steps. He raised his head and looked at the hall. In an instant, he felt the pain in his heart magnifying infinitely. He didn't feel the slightest bit numb. Who was it that said to drown his sorrows in wine? His sorrows were even more sorrowful. Helian Xiao suddenly smiled and closed his eyes slightly. When he reached out his hand to take the wine jar at the side, his hand touched nothing but air. Drinking wine is harmful to the body. A familiar voice sounded. Helian Xiao's body suddenly froze. He slowly turned his head to look and saw Feng Maching standing beside him with a wine jar in his hand. Feng Maching was wearing a dark purple robe. Helian Theo slowly lowered his hand. He lowered his head and didn't look at Feng Maching. Don't be in such a hurry to chase me away. Feng Maching quietly looked at Helian Theo and said, I'm here to bid you farewell. You. Helian Theo raised his head and looked at Feng Maching. Then, as if he felt that his action was too big, he turned his head away unnaturally and said, If you want to leave, just leave. Why are you talking to me? After Helian Theo said this, he did not hear a reply for a long time. Helian Theo almost thought that Feng Maching had left. He quickly turned his head, but when he turned his head, he met Feng Maching's burning eyes. I'm sorry, Feng Maching suddenly said as he looked at Helian Theo. Helian Theo's heart skipped a beat, but he remained silent. In the future, I won't appear in front of you again. You're right. I'm a man. In the future, I'll manage Sanluo Tower well, get married, and have children for the rest of my life. Feng Maching smiled lightly. I'm very sorry for this period of time, Feng Maching said as he bowed slightly to Helian Theo. You. Helian Xiao looked at Feng Maching's expression and listened to Feng Maching's words. These words were what he had been looking forward to hearing, but now that he really heard them, he didn't feel the slightest bit of joy. He could even clearly feel the pain coming from his heart. That kind of pain was so clear that Helian Theo's heart instantly clenched. Today, I'm here to bid you farewell. Northern Pastoral is your painstaking effort. I understand. When Feng Maching said this, he smiled very calmly. He reached out and put the wine jar in his hand aside and said, Tokyo has never let down his guard. I think you're the same. I'll help you. After Feng Maching said this, he turned around and was about to leave. Stop. Helian Theo was silent for a long time. Finally, when he saw Feng Maching turn around and leave, he suddenly raised his head and shouted. Helian Theo stood up shakily and looked at Feng Maching, whose back was facing him. Chapter 2132. What do you mean by what you said just now? Helian Theo asked as he stared at Feng Maching. His eyes were full of mockery. You think you can come and go as you please? Do you really think this is Sanluo Tower? Helian Theo approached Feng Maching step by step. Looking at Feng Maching's tall figure with his back facing him, Helian Theo felt very uncomfortable. Isn't this what you've always wanted? Feng Maching didn't turn around. With his back facing Helian Theo, he said, Don't worry, I won't come to this northern pastoral again. Feng Maching, you bastard. When Helian Theo heard Feng Maching's words, it was as if he had heard something extremely infuriating. He raised his hand, pulled Feng Maching over, and punched Feng Maching's face without hesitation. Why do you have to say whatever you want? Helian Theo looked at Feng Maching's collapsed appearance and suddenly felt very comfortable. Feng Maching fell to the ground in a somewhat sorry state. He reached out to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked up at Helian Theo. Helian Theo's drunkenness had probably kicked in. His body, which was pouncing towards Feng Maching, was a little unstable. Feng Maching reflexively supported Helian Theo. When he saw Helian Theo raise his fist again, he raised his hand and grabbed Helian Theo's wrist. Feng Maching's eyes were very calm. Once is enough. Feng Maching looked at Helian Theo. At this moment, Helian Theo was pressing down on Feng Maching, and the two of them were lying on the ground. Let go. Helian Theo was grabbed by Feng Maching. He frowned and shouted, This time, you pounced on me yourself. Why should I let go? Feng Maching looked at Helian Theo with a faint smile in his eyes. When he looked at Helian Theo, his eyes were filled with tenderness. This gaze made Helian Theo's heart skip a beat. You. Helian Theo was about to forcefully break free from Feng Maching's hand, but Feng Maching turned over and suppressed him. The two of them suddenly flipped over. In this spacious palace, the two of them were lying on the soft carpet. No matter how one looked at it, this scene was extremely ambiguous. Helian Theo's eyes were filled with astonishment. He didn't know why the situation had turned out this way in the blink of an eye. He felt dizzy and completely lost the ability to think. Helian Theo looked at Feng Maching and reached out to grab his collar. Didn't you want to know the answer? Helian Theo stared at Helian Theo. His narrowed eyes and smiled as if he wanted to say something. In an instant, Feng Maching held his breath, afraid that he would interrupt Helian Theo. However, just as Feng Maching's body stiffened as he waited, he saw Helian Xiao slowly release his hand. Then, that pair of beautiful eyes slowly closed. His head tilted to the side, and he actually fell asleep just like that. Even if you want to know, I won't tell you. These were the words that Helian Theo muttered. Helian Theo? You. Feng Maching looked at Helian Theo lying down and heard Helian Theo's last words. Suddenly, he felt extremely helpless. He had a belly full of anger, but there was nowhere to vent it. Looking at Helian Theo sleeping so comfortably, Feng Maching felt a deep sense of helplessness. He got up and bent down to carry Helian Theo to the bed. Looking at Helian Theo's incomparably beautiful face, the expression in his eyes was so complicated. What should I do? Feng Maching's words were so helpless. Chapter 21:33. When Helion Shio woke up, the first thing he saw was a familiar curtain and Feng Maching. Why are you on my bed? Helion Theo's brain crashed for a moment. He rubbed his aching head and looked at Feng Maching, who was looking at him with his head propped up. His eyes were filled with astonishment. Oh, have you forgotten? Feng Maching was wearing a simple inner garment. His black hair was scattered as he looked at Helion Theo calmly and said, "Last night, you cried and screamed for me not to leave. You even pulled me onto your bed. Don't you remember?" Feng Maching, get out of my sight. Helion Shio's exasperated roar ferociously kicked Feng Maching off the dragon bed. He looked very angry, but his handsome face and even his ears were red. On this morning, all the ministers felt that it was very strange because their emperor's mind had started to wander. Moreover, the tips of his ears had been very red. That absent-minded look made Muda break out in cold sweat. "Your Majesty, are you all right? Do you want the imperial physician to take a look?" After the morning court session, Muda looked at Helion Theo worriedly and asked. "I'm fine," Helion Theo said with a cold face. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." At this moment, a guard suddenly rushed over and said, "There's a man holding Your Majesty's token. He claims to be Your Majesty's friend and is waiting outside the hall." The guard said as he presented the jade pendant in his hand. When Helion Theo saw the jade pendant, his face immediately turned green. Helion Shio was still wearing the jade pendant yesterday. However, after a night, it had actually fallen into the hands of someone else. It was obvious who the guard was talking about. "Please come in." Even if Helion Shio did not want to meet him, Feng Maching had come to his door openly, so Helion Shio naturally had to meet him. When he saw Feng Maching, who was wearing a purple robe, walking in, Helion Shio was stunned. Helion Shio once again thought of what happened this morning. Immediately, the redness on the tip of his ears, which had disappeared with great difficulty, surfaced once again. Long time no see. Feng Maching's aura attracted the attention of everyone in the hall. Some of them looked at Feng Maching and Helion Theo curiously. "All of you, leave." Helion Theo took a deep breath and waved his hand to dismiss everyone. When only Helion Theo and Feng Maching were left in the room, Helion Theo stood up from his seat and glared at Feng Maching angrily. "What are you doing here? Isn't it enough for you to sneak in? You actually came in the open?" Helion Shio was obviously quite angry. "In order to see you openly, could it be that you prefer me to come secretly?" Feng Maching narrowed his eyes and looked at Helion Theo teasingly. The meaning in his eyes seemed to be implying something. Helion Theo instantly blushed. "Didn't you say yesterday that you were going to leave? Why haven't you left yet?" Helion Theo wisely chose not to continue this topic. Otherwise, he really didn't know what else Feng Maching could say. "I regret it," Feng Maching said happily. Feng Maching said happily, "Since our Emperor Helion is crying and begging me not to leave, then I naturally can't bear to leave," Feng Maching said with a smile, which immediately made Helion Shio's face turn ashen. Chapter 21:34. Feng Maching, if you dare to mention this again, Helion Theo glared at Feng Maching viciously. "As long as you let me stay in the palace, I won't mention it again." Feng Maching quickly raised his hands and said seriously. In the palace of the Northern Pastoral Palace, Feng Maching was lying comfortably on a soft couch, enjoying the massage of a beautiful palace maid. He felt incomparably comfortable. When Helion Theo finished his work and came over, he saw such a scene. Hee. It seems like Tower Master Feng really doesn't treat himself as an outsider. Helion Theo stared coldly at Feng Maching. When Feng Maching saw Helion Theo's arrival, he smiled happily. He stood up and looked at Helion Theo, saying, "I just want to experience how Emperor Helion lives in the palace. It seems like he's living quite well." Helion Theo's face darkened when he heard this. He waved his hand and dismissed everyone. Then, he walked towards Feng Maching and said, "What are you doing in the palace? You know, don't you?" Feng Maching narrowed his eyes and smiled. He looked at Helion Theo and said, "Wherever you are, I will be there. After all, you want me to stay, don't you?" Feng Maching smiled again. Helion Theo immediately shut his mouth. As expected, He couldn't say anything to Feng Maching. Otherwise, he wouldn't know what would come out of his mouth. Hellion Theo thought that Feng Maching would restrain himself when he came to the palace. However, he was obviously wrong. He was inviting a wolf into the house. Feng Maching, who allowed you to lie on my bed? After Hellion Theo took a bath and changed his clothes, he went into the inner room and saw Feng Maching lying on the bed in his underwear. His clothes were half open, revealing his muscular chest. Of course I'm here to serve you in bed. The corners of Hellion Theo's mouth twitched when he saw Feng Maching's devilish smile and the smile in his eyes. What should he do with this scoundrel? Could it be that His Majesty doesn't like me wearing clothes? It's okay. I can take it off myself. As Feng Maching spoke, he reached out to take off his clothes. Hellion Theo's face instantly turned red. He strode toward Feng Maching and reached out to pull Feng Maching down. Get out of here. Hellion Xiao shouted with a cold face. Aya, you're still the most interesting when you're drunk. Without saying a word, Feng Maching pulled Hellion Theo into his embrace. His pitch-black eyes stared intently at Hellion Theo. The hand that was holding Hellion Theo did not move at all. How dare you? Hellion Theo's face turned red. He always felt that his posture was quite sullen. You're clearly thinking the same thing as me. Why won't you admit it? Feng Maching reached out to caress Hellion Theo's face. His eyes were filled with complicated emotions. Then, he smiled and said, It's okay. I have a lot of time. I can wait slowly. As Feng Maching spoke, he released the hand that was holding Hellion Theo. Hellion Theo straightened his body and looked at Feng Maching silently. He asked, Why? Why can you let go of so many worries and be so determined to be a moth to a flame without hesitation? Hellion Theo looked deeply at Feng Maching. The expression in his eyes was so serious. Why? Feng Maching suddenly smiled and said, Maybe it's because Jingyu gave me too much encouragement? That's why I came here so bravely. Chapter 2135. Jingyu. Hellion Theo's eyes were tinged with a faint hint of surprise. He didn't expect Feng Maching to suddenly mention Jingyu.
Yes.
Feng Maching narrowed his eyes slightly and said, When I left 5 years ago, I originally planned to never appear again. However, Jingyu's words made it clear to me that if I don't fight with my life on the line, how will I know the outcome? Feng Maching's words made Hellion Theo's breathing stagnate. He looked into Feng Maching's pitch-black eyes. The seriousness in his eyes was so moving. Have you thought about the outcome? Hellion Theo was silent for a moment before he suddenly asked. This was probably the most serious conversation the two of them had ever had. One was leaning against the bed, while the other was standing by the bed. The two of them looked at each other as if this moment would last forever. What outcome do you want? Feng Maching didn't answer Hellion Theo's question. Instead, he pursed his lips and asked. Hellion Theo's body stiffened when he heard Feng Maching's question. It's getting late. You should go back. Hellion Theo turned his back. His silent appearance indicated that he chose to avoid the topic once again. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo's appearance and couldn't help but feel angry. He suddenly stood up and reached out to grab Hellion Theo's arm. With a cold expression, he said, How long are you going to avoid the topic? What's the point of hiding like this? Aren't you the same? You can only hide like this forever. Hellion Theo pursed his lips and emitted a very cold light. Feng Maching was stunned when he heard this. He looked at Hellion Theo's appearance and suddenly laughed. You've finally admitted it, haven't you? Hellion Theo, I'll be very happy if you can continue like this. What? Hellion Xiao was stunned. Feng Maching suddenly approached Hellion Xiao. Before Hellion Xiao could prepare himself, Feng Maching kissed Hellion Xiao directly. The familiar touch made Hellion Xiao's brain crash. Feng Maching did not give Hellion Xiao the slightest chance to react. He directly reached out and grabbed Hellion Xiao, driving straight in. The candlelight in the room was burning. Feng Maching panted heavily and slowly let go of his hand. His pitch-black eyes stared intently at Hellion Theo, who was lying under him. Looking at Hellion Theo's red face and unsteady breathing, his eyes were filled with information. Listen. Feng Maching picked up Hellion Theo's hand and placed it on his heart. Hellion Theo could clearly feel the strong heartbeat coming from his palm. The morning sun was a little dazzling. Helian Shio slowly opened his tightly shut long and narrow eyes. The feeling of a heavy object pressing down on his waist made Helian Shio's body stiffen. When he turned his head to look, the first thing he saw was Feng Maching's still sleeping face. Feng Maching, didn't I tell you to get lost? Why are you on my bed again? Helian Theo was about to go crazy. Oh, beauty, good morning. Feng Maching opened his eyes and looked at Helian Theo's angry appearance. He calmly smiled and said, I don't know why I'm here. You're probably sleepwalking. Feng Maching said as he moved closer to Helian Theo and planted a light kiss on Helian Theo's lips. Your Majesty, it's time for you to go to court. Feng Maching said with a smile as he supported his chin and looked at Helian Theo's red face. As soon as he said this, Helian Theo immediately shut up. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.